Deep beneath the freezing, turbulent waters of the North Sea lies a forgotten world. Around 8,000 years ago, a catastrophic tsunami swept across a vast stretch of low-lying land connecting Britain to mainland Europe. This landmass, known to modern archaeologists as Doggerland, was entirely swallowed by the sea. The hunter-gatherers who survived were pushed east to a shoreline that was unstable, swampy, and perpetually sinking. This flooded wasteland is where our story begins. Today, when you think of the Dutch, a specific image comes to mind. You picture the tallest people on earth, riding bicycles down meticulously paved streets, surrounded by fields of vibrantly colored tulips and spinning windmills. You think of a progressive, peaceful nation. But what if this postcard-perfect image is merely a mask? What if the true story of the Dutch people begins not in tranquil flower fields, but in the violent collapse of the Roman Empire? What if the same people who carved wooden shoes to keep their feet out of the mud were also the architects of the most ruthless and lucrative corporate empire in human history? The truth about the origins of the Dutch is far stranger, far more brutal, and far more globally interconnected than any traditional history textbook has ever revealed. It is a story of genetic anomalies, ancient tribal warfare, and an existential thousand-year war against the ocean itself. And by the end of this journey, everything you thought you knew about this small European nation will be completely shattered. To understand the Dutch, you must first understand the fundamental trauma of their geography. The name Netherlands literally translates to Low Countries. Today, roughly one-third of the entire nation sits below sea level. Without an unimaginably complex continuous network of dikes, dams, and mechanical pumping stations, a massive portion of the country would simply vanish beneath the waves. This precarious existence is an ancient, defining struggle. Long before the nation-state was conceived, the earliest inhabitants of this Rhine river delta were engaged in a daily battle for survival. In the 1st century, Roman author Pliny the Elder encountered the ancestors of the Dutch, the Frisian and Chauci tribes, and was horrified. He described a wretched race living on turpin, artificial mounds of clay and dung built to survive the high tides. Pliny wrote that when the tide came in, these tribesmen looked like sailors on a ship, and when the tide went out, they looked like shipwrecked castaways. The Romans, who had conquered the known world with their engineering and organized legions, looked at this swampy frontier and decided it simply wasn't worth the effort. But these Germanic tribes, the Franks, the Saxons, the Frisians, and the Batavians, were not just surviving, they were hardening. They refused to bow to Roman authority. In 9 AD, an alliance of Germanic tribes ambushed and utterly annihilated 3 highly trained Roman legions in the dense, muddy terrain of the Teutoburg forest. It was a conflict so profound that it permanently halted the expansion of the Roman Empire. The Rhine River became the definitive border. The Romans effectively said, "Keep your swamps." But the tribes of the lowlands did not stay in their swamps forever. Fast forward to the 4th and 5th centuries. As the Western Roman Empire began its agonizing collapse, these same Germanic tribes swept southward. The Franks, carrying the bloodlines of the ancient Dutch, didn't just conquer territory, they built the foundation of modern Europe. Under Charlemagne, the Frankish Empire dominated the continent. These early Dutch ancestors were not passive dairy farmers. They were capable warriors, empire builders, and the influential leaders of antiquity. If we want concrete proof of these ancient origins, we no longer have to rely solely on the biased accounts of Roman historians. We can look directly into the blood. Scientists have found that the DNA of the Dutch shows a clear connection to ancient groups from the Eurasian steppes. Thousands of years ago, nomadic people moved across Europe, and their genetic legacy remains deeply embedded in the Dutch population today. This means that many Dutch people carry the direct biological history of those ancient travelers who settled the region long ago. The DNA also reveals a unique social history. Men in these communities tended to stay in the same local areas for centuries, while women moved more frequently between regions. This created stable, long-lasting family lines that helped these communities survive and thrive in a challenging environment for generations. And then there's the ultimate physical paradox, their height. Today, the Dutch are statistically the tallest people on the planet. But if you look at military conscription records from the mid-19th century, the Dutch were among the shortest people in Europe. How did an entire population undergo such a radical physical transformation in just 150 years? Scientists attribute this explosive growth to natural selection and environmental wealth, driven by world-class healthcare, equitable wealth distribution, and a dairy-rich diet. Over generations, tall Dutch men had more children than shorter men, and the environment allowed those children to reach their maximum genetic potential. The towering Dutch of today are a modern evolutionary marvel, forged by cheese, medicine, and sudden prosperity. The history of this people isn't just coded in their DNA, it is spoken in their daily lives. Dutch is a linguistic fossil. As the 3rd most widely spoken Germanic language on Earth, it serves as a bridge between English and German. Listen to the echoes of the ancient tribes. The word for water in English is Wasser in German, but it remains exactly water in Dutch. School in English, Schule in German, school in Dutch. Apple in English, Apfel in German, Appel in Dutch. These are not coincidences. They are the remnants of Proto-Germanic, the ancestral tongue spoken by the warriors who defied Rome. But this language did not remain confined to the swampy delta of Europe. Today, in neighboring Belgium, they speak Flemish, a distinct dialect of Dutch. More remarkably, thousands of miles away on the southern tip of Africa, millions of people speak Afrikaans, a language that evolved directly from the Dutch dialects brought by settlers in the 17th century. This linguistic explosion brings us to the darkest, most transformative chapter of Dutch origins, because the men who had stayed anchored to their local mudflats for 1,500 years suddenly realized that the very technology they used to conquer the water at home could be used to conquer the world. When modern people think of the great colonial empires, they immediately picture the British redcoats or the Spanish conquistadors. The Dutch are almost always forgotten. This is a massive historical blind spot. By the early 1600s, the Dutch had mastered hydraulic engineering. They had developed complex wind-powered pumps to reclaim land, a process requiring immense communal organization and shipbuilding skills. They took these ships, hardened by the brutal North Sea, and turned their eyes toward the global horizon. In 1602, they invented something that would change the trajectory of human history forever, the Dutch East India Company. The VOC was not just a business. It was the first publicly traded corporation in the world. Adjusting for inflation, the VOC was worth an estimated $7.9 trillion, making it the most valuable corporation in history. The Dutch government granted the company the power to mint its own coins, establish colonies, negotiate treaties, and most notably, wage war. For over 300 years, the Dutch aggressively controlled the Indonesian archipelago. They colonized territories in Brazil, the Caribbean, India, Sri Lanka, and South Africa. They established a New World trading post called New Amsterdam, known today as New York City. The financial mechanisms of Wall Street were quite literally invented by the Dutch. And here is a fact that routinely shocks historians. The Dutch were the first Europeans to discover Australia and New Zealand. In 1642, more than a full century before the British Captain James Cook ever set sail, the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman navigated the treacherous southern oceans. He mapped the coastlines of a massive uncharted landmass, becoming the first European to sight New Zealand, Fiji, and the island that now bears his name, Tasmania. The British eventually took the credit, but the Dutch laid the path. Yet we rarely talk about the sheer intensity of this era. The immense wealth of the Dutch Golden Age was extracted through the power of their global network. It was built on a foundation of monopoly, subjugation, and the difficult reality of the transatlantic and Indian Ocean slave trades. Understanding the true origins of the Dutch means looking this paradox directly in the eye. You cannot separate their engineering genius from their expansive reach. So, who are the Dutch? They are the survivors of Doggerland's destruction. They are the descendants of Frankish leaders who challenged the Roman Empire. They are the genetic heirs of ancient nomadic groups. They are the people who, faced with the constant threat of drowning, engineered their way to survival and became the ultimate masters of the sea. They built a multi-trillion-dollar corporate empire, discovered continents before the British, and left linguistic footprints across the globe. Origin stories are never clean lines. They are chaotic webs of adaptation, migration, and sheer willpower. The next time you see a postcard of a windmill or a wooden shoe, look closer. You're looking at the legacy of a people who conquered the ocean, reshaped global capitalism, and left a permanent mark on the DNA of the world.